don't want to be seen, you don't have to be seen. There's a lot of control there. It's actually kind of a nice experience. I'm going to talk a little bit about what this event will have, and then I'm going to give kind of a mini. A lot of control there. It's actually kind of a nice experience. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm getting some feedback. I'm hoping that Michael or Lori can fix that for us, because that's a little crazy. Oh, Lori just showed me a screenshot of how this looks. I'm hoping that Michael or Lori. Yeah, guys, we are live. Let's get it together. All right, I'm going to cut my own volume so I don't have to hear myself. Freaky. So let's get back to where we were before. That was crazy. We're doing this May 20th, starting at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 p.m. Pacific Time. By the way, if you sign up and miss this live, you will have access to it for, I think it's a full month. We might make it longer than that, not sure, but it will be available for quite some time. So for the event, we've got, I'm doing 2 brand new lectures. I've been working pretty hard on those. These are new for me. So one is looking ahead at UFO secrecy 9-10 years from now, UFO secrecy in 2030. What will that be like? I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then my other lecture is all about looking at the corporate structure of this entire UFO phenomenon, something that really does not get enough attention. Just lately, it has been getting some, but I think we need to do a little bit more than that. So I'm actually going to kill all of my volume. I'm getting feedback, but I'm assuming that YouTube is not getting feedback, so we'll just deal with it. For the event, so I've got my 2 lectures. I'll have Luis Elizondo, who, of course, I think everyone in the UFO field knows. Lou was on 60 Minutes just the other day. He's been on the news many, many times talking about, oh, my goodness, his experience with the ATIP program and the upcoming UAP task force report. And actually quite a bit more is going on all around. I just had a brief chat today with Lou, and he's looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to having him on. So Lou's involvement is going to be twofold. So he'll be on for 3 hours total. For the first 90 minutes, he will be interviewed by me. And I have a lot of questions I'll be asking him. And then for the next 90-minute section, he will be answering your questions. If you are an attendee, you'll be able to ask him open mic, essentially. I'll be on the stage with him, but I have a feeling he's going to get probably 90% to 100% of all the questions, and he should be getting them. He's got a lot to say. The other guests that I have who will be participating in this are the guys collectively known as the Young Guns. That's Jay from Project Unity, the YouTube channel, James Iandoli of the YouTube channel Engaging Phenomenon, Danny Silva of the blog The Silva Record, and Joe Murgia of UFOjoe.net. These guys, I have just such incredible respect for all 4 of them. I would say of all the journalists working the UFO field, they don't write for the New York Times, don't write for the Washington Post or for the New Yorker, but I think that they do the best daily and weekly journalism of the UFO subject that's out there. And they are on top of every single issue that concerns us in this field. They will be here, and that's going to be very exciting. So they'll be on a panel that I will moderate. But basically, this is just their time. They're just going to be talking, giving their take on what is new and relevant in the UFO field. So Lou, Young Guns, 2 lectures by me, lots of interactivity. When this event is over, there will be, I think, a minimum of 3 hours in which people will just actually be able to hang out like at a conference in the regular world, like where you can actually look at each other and talk to each other and interact. So we've got that whole thing happening as well, if you're interested in that. So that's the event. And I just want to get into some of the themes that I will be talking about. I mean, one of the main things that just shocks me when I think of the UFO subject these days is just what an absolutely insane, crazy time this is. I mean, I've been into the UFO field for about 25 years, a little bit more than that now. And there's never been anything like this. I remember back in 1997 when Roswell had its 50th anniversary, and there was a CIA paper that came out on UFOs, and there was Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. There was a lot that happened in 97, and there was this kind of anticipation, kind of atmosphere that was going on. But that does not in any shape match what we're dealing with today. I mean, then you had Stephen Greer's press conference in 2001. That was certainly a big thing in the UFO field. And you had, a bunch of X conferences run by Steve Bassett over the years. And then, we finally come up to the TTSA era, and that's of the last 3.5 years. And it just seems to me that what we are in right now is an era of just one UFO bombshell after another. I mean, think about what we've experienced since late 2017. It's 3.5 years. You start off with the TTSA press conference in October of that year. In December, you get 2 articles in the New York Times, and plus a bonus article in Politico, all on UFOs, like going relative, for mainstream corporate establishment newspaper, pretty deep, let's face it. And there was actually new, genuine information. We get the news of the Tic Tac UFO encounter with Commander David Fravor in the U.S. Navy. Get information about the fact that the Pentagon did, after all, have this secret UFO study group that was operating. Like, you realize for years and years and years, right, we were wondering, like, what's the government doing? Are they studying this? And it's very obvious to all of us, I think, that ATIP was by no means the only, or by even the most important of the UFO programs that were going on, but it's the one that we've learned about. And the fact that we learned anything about it at all, maybe we're used to it now, but I think we all remember in December of 2017, that was a huge, huge news item. And then right after that, you get a bunch of other things that just came out, the 3 videos, the Tic Tac, the Go Fast, and the Gimbal UFO video that skeptics loved to debunk and argue over, but which the Navy has eventually subsequently said, yes, those are legit, those are authentic. In January, I think it was January of 2018, you get the release of 38 titles of papers through the Defense Intelligence Agency, really through the ATIP program. 38 like really interesting, cutting edge scientific papers that were contracted by and through the ATIP program. Fascinating stuff. Later that spring, you get George Knapp reporting that Bigelow Advanced Aerospace, BASS, had done a very involved UAP UFO analysis for the ATIP program. If you remember that, that was really quite fascinating. Later that spring, Hal Puthoff does his lecture on the metamaterials, which went out through Vimeo. Talked with Hal about that in the aftermath. I don't think he knew it was on Vimeo. He was like, wait, what? I don't think he thought that was supposed to go out, but that went out to the public. And that was a fascinating discussion of a material that no one really knew how to explain fundamentally. So that was, I think, in June of 2018. Later in 2019, you get everyone's arguing over, was Lou Elizondo, was he really an ATIP? There was that whole controversy. Susan Gao of the Pentagon said, no, they never studied UFOs, and all of this nonsense came out. We now know that was absolutely not true. In 2019, you get a New York Times article, again, another New York Times piece. This one was even better, I think, by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, all about the USS Roosevelt. And, in that article, you get to meet Ryan Graves, who was one of the Navy pilots, and you get to hear about a sighting of an object, a sphere and a cube, flying between 2 Super Hornet aircraft while they were on maneuvers. It's insane. That comes out. You get the information that they were having virtually daily sightings for an extended period of time with these UAP off the Atlantic coast. It's amazing. You get that same spring of 2019, Lou Elizondo's on Tucker Carlson and talking, in my opinion, just dropping an incredible bombshell about UFO crash retrievals. Carlson says something like, so has the government acquired any of these things? And, Lou says, well, Tucker, my NDAs prevent me from, et cetera, et cetera. But in a word, long pause, yes. it's like a drop mic moment on national news television. Like, when had that ever happened before? A month after that, a few days after that, actually, in early June of 2019, the Davis Wilson notes get leaked out. I was very much involved in talking about those. And I'll have a few things to say about those on Thursday on the May 20th event, by the way, and some new things to say about that. To the people who kept arguing that notes are fake or a movie script or some other nonsense, I think the absurdity of a lot of those bunkers and deniers is becoming more and more evident. Those notes are real, and the evidence is absolutely overwhelming. I will present more of that on May 20th. I mean, I present a lot of it already, but there's much more to say. Also in 2019, these are still more bombshells. The Pentagon finally, or the Navy, I think, acknowledges that, yes, those UFO videos are real. It's interesting because those had originally been released through the auspices of Lou Elizondo and I believe Chris Mellon. So privately, they were able to get those videos through FOIA, through legitimate means, but they were not officially acknowledged by the Navy until the fall of 2019. Then they were. Basically, I think they just caved because they realized it was rather pointless to continue to pretend that they weren't. As time goes on, 2020, you got then President Donald Trump saying that he had heard interesting things about UFOs, talking with his son, Don Jr., about UFOs in Roswell. Like, when do you get that from a U.S. president? Like, in almost live time, talking about UFOs, and not in a dismissive way, not as a joke. That summer, 2020, you get another New York Times piece by Leslie and Ralph that, you read that article carefully. I mean, I think many of us were expecting more out of that article than what happened. But in retrospect, there's some serious stuff that was being dropped in that piece. And particularly, it seems to me that they came to within a hair's breadth of essentially saying that there were UFO crash retrievals. They quoted Elizondo, they talked to Eric Davis, and they quoted Harry Reid, who had made a very seemingly forthright statement about the reality of all this. And then Harry Reid had to walk that back on Twitter a day or two later because he realized, oops, said too much. I think Harry Reid is almost in danger of becoming like Buzz Aldrin, guy who makes these incredible statements about UFOs. And then you can just see like the handlers coming in that night saying, sir, you're really not supposed to have said that. And then they walk it back. Harry Reid, once again, just did this a few weeks ago after the New Yorker quoted him on Lockheed. That was some pretty heavy duty stuff. Here's Harry Reid saying, yes, while we were working ATIP, I tried to get a clearance to see what was going on there because everyone has heard for years and years about Lockheed and UFOs and reverse engineering. And that goes into the New Yorker piece. And the next day, Harry Reid's like, no, that's not what I mean. And other people may think that about Lockheed, but I don't. Nice try, Senator Reid, but no one believes you. But this is how it's been all this time. We get the announcement of and the funding of the UAP task force, which was kicked off last December. It was one of the last things of the Trump administration. And that's, of course, something that everyone is talking about. People, we keep coming back to that. What's the task force going to say? I've been saying all along, don't hold your breath waiting for something to just change the world. I'm very doubtful that will be the case for a lot of reasons. But particularly, first you have to wonder, what will they actually get access to? They're certainly not going to get access to Lockheed. They're not going to get access, to the Department of Energy, where everyone knows there's more UFO data there. Are they going to have access even to the special access programs buried within the Pentagon itself? I'm thinking highly unlikely. At best, it's highly unlikely. And, more realistically, it's probably a snowball's chance in hell that they will be able to get that immediately. So there's that. And then on top of that, you just have to wonder how much information will reach the public in non-classified form. I've often wondered about this. When you think about the massive number of UFO sightings that take place every single year that we know about, the National UFO Reporting Center, which anyone can go to on the web, and the MUFON CMS, their database, which MUFON investigators have access to, you're talking well over 10,000 sightings in those two websites per year. Now, obviously, most of those are, we can say, what percentages are explainable. 80%, 99%, no one really knows. No one can agree. There's still a lot of very good reports and cases that are in those. Will the Navy, or will the task force rather, have that in its report? And then you have to assume the military's got satellites. They've got all types of electronic gathering data systems in which they can scarf up all kinds of anomalous data that the rest of us aren't even aware of. I mean, you have the case of the USS Roosevelt, which I just mentioned, reporting daily sightings of UFOs. And then just recently, it came out not even just for, 9 months, which I had thought from the summer of 2014 to the spring of 2015, but for upwards of 2 years, apparently daily sightings. So what is that? Are we talking 700 sightings for the Roosevelt? Is that possible? Maybe it is possible. How many of those are going to make it into the UAP task force? I mean, we have to assume if the task force were actually to include all of the genuine military UFO data that's been collected over the past, year, 2 years, 5 years? How far back do they even go? Say they go back even 3 years. We could be talking many thousands of sightings. I absolutely believe that. And I would have a very difficult time thinking that all of those are going to, or even a substantial percentage of them are going to be included in this task force. So there's going to be a lot that we left out. But just in general, the word is just coming out like there's, I think, 2 people working this thing. You really have to wonder how much data are they going to get. And now you've got the Inspector General's office in the Pentagon being directed to look over the process, essentially to see if this is, even going to be, useful at all. It's just, I think there's a lot that could go wrong here. And one thing I was just mentioning a few weeks ago, I think I was on Fade to Black with Jimmy Church, and I just wondered, the recent leaks that have come out. So the video leak that went to Jeremy Corbell, and the photographs that were published by Mystery Wire, that's George Knapp. I mean, these are interesting indeed. But wouldn't it be a disappointment if those were the most hotshot revelations that come out of this task force? It would be a disappointment. The fact is, no one really knows what's going to be in this. But for my part, I'm going to be kind of amazed if there are true bombshells in this. That does not mean that we're not living in an age of UFO bombshells. We definitely are. I think the New Yorker article that just came out recently that talked about Lockheed was essentially a lot of it was about Leslie Kean. It was a very good article. But to me, the big bombshell was the Lockheed statement. And so when you look back over all of these little data points that I've just been going over from the last few years, and there's many that I've left out. Think about this. In any other era, this were more than 5 or 10 years ago or prior, can you just imagine what any one of those headlines or those news items might have done to society had they come out at that time? I think it conceivably could have been a very different response. Somehow we're in an era in which what we're seeing is a very, I want to say controlled process, but I'm not sure that's really the best way to discuss this. What I personally see happening, and this has been my interpretation almost from the beginning, is that you've got a faction of dissatisfied people within the Pentagon and intelligence system. And it's really not that outrageous to think of this, because the fact is there have always been factions forever. In every ruling elite, going back to ancient Rome and before, there are always factions. There are groups that do not, at the hierarchy, at the top, they don't all have the same opinion. And within the UFO field itself, and within the military, and within the intelligence community, we also know for a fact that there have been factions. Going back to the 1950s, you read the books by Donald Keyhoe, talks about this. There was the secrecy group. Yes, they were the ones who were in charge of keeping all this slammed down tight. But then there were the others. There were the other people within the military who firmly believed that UFO secrecy was kind of not the American way, is how they would put that back then. And so there are always different opinions. Even in the 1950s with the organization NICAP, there was the former director of the CIA, Roscoe Hillenkotter, who was friends with Keyhoe. And Hillenkotter, for 5 years, was a board member of NICAP until he clearly was forced to resign by pressure from his intelligence community colleagues. I wrote all about that in Volume 1 of UFOs in the National Security State, but very well-known story. So my point is that I think what we're dealing with today is that we're seeing a faction that has its own reasons for wanting to get this information out. And I'll talk with Lou Elizondo about this on Thursday. But on the other side of it, there are definitely those who do not support this at all. A couple of years ago, I ran into Brian Bender of Politico at a UFO event back when human beings still would meet in person for these things. Remember those days? I ran into Brian Bender and we chatted a little bit, and it wasn't a long conversation, but that was one of the key things that we both took out from it, from his investigation. His attitude was, look, you've got people within the Pentagon who support Elizondo, Chris Mellon, TTSA, and he said, and you've got significant factions that oppose them. And I think that's the reality. I think that's what we have been seeing. So I guess what I'm saying, in any other era, these prior bombshells would have been a huge thing, but what's different now? So you've got a faction that's trying to push information out, but there's now a level of media control that even 10 years ago, really we did not have. Legacy media, yes, legacy media has always been controlled. All right. But it's incredible to think that it wasn't that long ago when all of us realized that Facebook wasn't controlled, that YouTube wasn't controlled, that Google search algorithms, we used to think that those were honest algorithms. And 10 years ago, by and large, those were true. But a lot has changed. So in the last 10 years, we've seen, really in the last 6-7 years, I say since 2015 is when it really went into high gear, where we began seeing this version of the Empire Strikes Back, essentially, where, in response to all of the new information, the flow of information, and the fact that, the rabble, that is us, were getting a little bit out of control with all the information we were sharing, we started seeing a crackdown. And, war on fake news or hate speech or all these other reasons that were being used to justify silencing voices that were inconvenient, stirring the pot too much, and so forth. And it couldn't happen all at once. But you can see we're in the boiling frog situation here. And so by now, with all this information coming out, yes, it's still spreading, still going viral. There's still some social media. But there's no question in my mind, this would have way more effectively more than 5 years ago. And right now we're dealing with dishonest search algorithms, primarily by YouTube, Google and YouTube, but really everywhere. And then there's Twitter. Let's not forget them. So I think that has actually had something to do with damping down the reaction and the relative lack of public getting worked up over this, to the extent that I would have expected that they would. I co-authored a book 10 years ago, a little more than that, called After Disclosure. And the one thing that we didn't see, and that I don't think anyone really saw back in 2010 was, you have this much UFO data that's come out that I was just mentioning at the beginning of this. And I think anyone would have thought that's going to cause an avalanche, boom, right away. And what we're seeing is not an avalanche. We're seeing a drip of disclosure. And just this week, I was really thinking a lot about this because I'm preparing my 2 presentations. And, where I was saying for several months that there's a red line of disclosure. And that red line, in my opinion, always had to do with crash retrievals and acquired UFO tech and alien bodies. Because the fact is, like when you go into the UFO research with any amount of depth, that is what you find. And you don't find it one time, you don't find it 10 times, you find it hundreds of times. There are so many accounts that point to this scenario that it is, in my view, I would say it's a virtual certainty this is the case. Too much information has come out. And that has always been the red line, because going over that puts the establishment, the government, the military in a much more difficult position. You know, it's one thing for folks in the media, or even for Lou Elizondo or Chris Mellon or any of these folks to say, hey, these objects, these UAP, they could be anything. What if they're Russian? What if they're Chinese? It's like, you know, they don't believe that. None of these people believe that. But I think you can also see why they would say such a thing. It's like, you know, they don't want to put themselves out there and expose themselves to additional ridicule, additional hostility by saying the kinds of things that I've been saying for years, which is that there's a cover up, there's a conspiracy. Yes, UFO conspiracy, it's real. They don't want to do that. They don't want to go into aliens right away. And I think we understand that. But so that's the red line. And when the government makes this admission that they have recovered flying saucers, like you read about in the Davis Wilson notes, or alien bodies, which we've heard in this research time and again, that's a much more difficult proposition for them to defend, because now you're dealing with absolute conspiracy cover-up. There's really no way to get around that. And we're in an era in which conspiracy theories are not supposed to be believed in, at least not the bad ones. You're supposed to believe in the good conspiracy theories, like, you know, Al-Qaeda taking out the Twin Towers or that type of thing. But you're not supposed to believe in the bad conspiracy theories, which is any of them that really go against the actual structure of power, often criminal power, that exists in the United States and the Western world. Like, no, you're not supposed to believe in that. And the UFO conspiracy, probably, I would think, that's the mother of all conspiracies. How could that not be? So the red line is the crash retrieval line. But actually, as I've been thinking about it, there's quite a bit more levels of disclosure. And this is something I'm really going to be getting into quite a bit during one of my lectures on this Thursday, May 20th. And you know, I can't claim credit fully for this idea. There's some brilliant people who belong to my website over at Richard Olin Members. One of them put forward a kind of initial idea of the levels of disclosure that actually are possible, you know, from the least jarring to the most. And I looked that over, and I definitely took that, and I think I added I doubled the number of layers that are in that. So we went from 8 to, I've got about 16 levels of disclosure. And I'm not going to go over all of them here, but just suffice to say, of the 16 levels that I've looked at, he just entered level 3. All right. So level 1 is old-fashioned debunking. It's like, you know, there's no such thing as UFOs, only things that we don't fully understand, or that, you know, witnesses didn't properly observe. And we've heard that for years and years. And then you get to level 2, which we've been at for a while, which is that some of those UFOs seem like actual UFOs from outer space, but really, most likely, they're just our advanced technology, secret tech, black budget, which you still might be misinterpreting anyway. And that's really where we have been all this time, until just recently we get to level 3, which is very simple. An admission that there is something out there that we don't understand. We don't know what it is. And that's kind of an important thing for military to even acknowledge. I mean, you could say that they were doing this in the 50s. You know, they're saying, well, we've got a certain number of these reports, but it's different today. It's totally different today, because what we're really getting is an admission that these are actual craft. These are intelligently controlled craft that no one can figure out. That's still falling short of an actual confirmation or even a strong suggestion that these are extraterrestrial. Like, they haven't gone there yet. And another limitation of this level is that it's not even from the office of the president yet. I mean, yeah, the Navy's important, the Pentagon's important. They make this admission. It's, you could say, essentially, it's from the government. Still not quite. You could still even imagine that there would be just barely enough wiggle room for a president to say, no, they thought they had it, they didn't. No one might believe that, imagine that, but the president could get away with it anyway because you have a compliant media and they can basically just say what they want these days. So that's where we're at, is level 3. And there are just many, many more levels. I suspect the task force might get us to an official level 4. This is what I would call level 4, which would be something like, yeah, lately we've been having quite a lot of these encounters, like a lot of them, and we still don't know what they are. That's a possibility. So they might ramp it up in terms of discussing the quantity of these cases. They may not do that. Entirely possible that doesn't happen, but conceivably it is. But between that and like a genuine avalanche kind of a situation of UFO disclosure, there's quite a few other steps. Like, they could just say, thinking about like the metamaterial and the artifacts that are being studied, the CRADA project with the U.S. Army and TTSA did announce this over a year ago. They might say something like, we have recently studied some unusual artifacts, but we don't really have any determinate conclusions about them. Like, that would be an easy thing for them to say. So it would be hint, a little suggestion, and maybe we don't have proper, provenance of these. We don't really know where they came from. They are interesting, they're suggestive, but we still don't really know. All of these little micro steps are totally possible. And in fact, I think that they're very likely to happen because it's my own assessment at this time that powers that be, if we can use that phrase, are not interested in a genuine opening up of this subject any more than they've done. And really the only reason it's been opened up is that we've had an initiative from TTSA that has met with a reaction from the establishment, within the Pentagon and the intelligence community. So they can't deny the whole thing because it's just too strong an argument, but they're obviously dragging their feet to the max. There are additional levels of where this might go. It could be like another level that would be interesting, but still not an avalanche, would be something like, yeah, we've concluded that some of these UFOs probably come from somewhere else, but we don't know anything about them. Like, they could say that. And a lot of us wouldn't believe that, but they could actually take the game to that level. They could take the discussion to that level. And when you really think about it, we wouldn't be in a radically different position than where we are now in terms of an open discussion of the UFO phenomenon. The only difference would be, it would be possible that, you're seeing the beginnings of a snowball effect, maybe the beginnings of a little more momentum. But even at that level, at that point of an admission, to me, it's not a done deal that is going to lead automatically and immediately to UFO disclosure. I think, by the way, that was my level 6. So I think level 7, as I identify it, you get into some potential danger zones. So level 7 would be something like, if they get to a point where they say, okay, well, we've actually known about this phenomenon for some time. We've known that there are these UFOs for many decades, but we kept it secret to avoid panic because we ourselves still don't have a lot of information about it. They could say that. So they're still not getting into the realm of UFO crash retrievals or acquisition of technology. There are many, many levels. Now, they get to the level where they make an admission that they've known about this for a long time. That's getting into a little bit of a dangerous territory, because now you're essentially getting into an admission of lying to the public for a long period of time about something that many of us have suspected and were debunked and ridiculed, and then suddenly, there's this turnaround. So that could very well cause additional pushing forward from researchers, and that could prompt additional leaks and so forth. But even that is a defensible position for those individuals who are intent on maintaining this secret. And there's quite a few more steps as well until you get, right to, whatever. What is the final step going to be? I mean, acknowledgement that there's been a lifelong international cover-up to keep all this information from the public, or a final confession about a craft, or maybe multiple crafts, or maybe bodies that have been secretly recovered for analysis. But even if they say that, they'll say, yeah, we've got that, but we still haven't really understood it. Like, there are so many areas in which this can just be delayed and delayed and delayed even further. And then another, level of disclosure has to be that, an admission that much of this secret has gone private. It's gone into the corporations beyond any kind of meaningful government purview, any kind of meaningful government oversight. And again, when you study the Davis-Wilson notes, what becomes very clear is that this type of secrecy is indeed so far beyond what our Constitution, what our legal system is meant to authorize. And yet it exists anyway. Keep calling it legal illegality. And that will be another level of disclosure. At some point, we're going to have to get to that, an acknowledgement that the private corporations essentially are, I don't know, I want to say that they're running the whole show of these special access programs. There's a lot of evidence to show that they have overwhelming power. They certainly got a lot of money. But the Pentagon has power too. The Pentagon controls a lot of the purse strings, obviously. But it does appear that these private corporations have a tremendous amount of privacy, a tremendous amount of leeway, lots of money, and that the Pentagon liaisons don't really seem to be the key to managing this secret. But disclosure can even go farther than that. Like, you can finally get an acknowledgement that, yes, we actually have known a lot about these beings that have been here on Earth for a long time. Yes, you got us. We're going to finally admit it. Like, that is something that at some point needs to come out, because that is something that is true. And it's an acknowledgement that everyone is expecting. And then there's further acknowledgments, maybe some acknowledgement like, yes, we've come to understand that these other beings, or one of these other groups, whatever, have been here for a long time. And have they monitored us? Have they manipulated us in any way? How would we even get answers to this? I mean, answers that they wouldn't want us to have. I don't know. But these are all possibilities, and these things may very well in some future come up for discussion. And then, ultimately, what if you've got a walking among us type of scenario? Is that something that will come up disclosure? I didn't even get into things like abductions and all the encounters that people have. So there are so many levels of this subject that can just come out by drips and drabs. There is no, I've at least come to feel that there is no inherent reason why everything is going to have to come out all at once. Yes, that was, I think, an assumption that probably many of us had, that when it happens, boom, it's going to happen, and it's going to be this massive turn the world inside out sort of thing. But I don't necessarily think that anymore. I think, getting even past level 3 of disclosure, where I think we are, we're going to have, just like the song says, many rivers to cross. It's going to be a long, long, arduous battle before we actually get genuine confirmation that's going to satisfy the world from an authoritative source that people actually genuinely are going to listen to. Right? To get that, it's going to be very difficult, and it may be impossible. And the reason it may be impossible, at least for the short to medium term, is very simple. Because the structure of secrecy is such that it just may not ever be possible for any government inquiry to get access to those programs. Right. That I think is really going to be a huge problem. And for that to change, it's not even a matter of like changing the laws. Yes, that's a no-brainer. But the question is, how do you even know like where to look in this labyrinth of secrecy? That is the Pentagon. That is the Department of Energy. That is the CIA. And, that includes private contracting organizations like Lockheed or like SAIC or heck, the Battelle Memorial Institute or any number of others that have been connected to the UFO research and development history. And all of those I will be talking about in my other lecture, which is essentially I call UFO crash retrievals a classified corporate gold rush. And I'm not going to do the whole lecture here. That's a packed 90 minutes. But essentially, I've broken it down into into 4 segments. So I'll have evidence or testimony concerning UFO technology acquisition. Very interesting, compelling evidence in my view. And then evidence of corporate involvement in that entire scenario. I'll have a lot to say about Lockheed, but other corporations as well. And then I will talk a little bit actually quite a bit about the revolutionary science implicit in UFO technology. And that doesn't just have to do with the actual artifacts that probably have been studied, but sciences that have been developed based on observations of UFOs. I'm talking about energy technology, propulsion technology. It's very interesting. And when you start looking into that, you begin to realize just why the secrecy on this is so profound. It's so overwhelming. It's talking immense amount of money and power and technology that, is just off the charts and really world changing. And then the last segment of that is a dive into the structure of secrecy as I see it, how this entire secret is protected, how the Pentagon, for example, and I'll be doing a bit of an analysis of the Davis Wilson notes and demonstrating just by looking through that how the bureaucracy of the Pentagon seems to be protecting these private corporations to do the research and development on UFO tech and essentially building their own flux liners or ARVs off the grid, as it were. So that's a bit of the structure of what I will be doing. And as I said, for this event, I'll have Lou Elizondo on for about full 3 hours, and the brilliant young guns. That's James Iandoli, Danny Silva, Joe Mergia, and Jay of Project Unity. Talked to Joe Mergia earlier today. He's got so much to share, and actually all of these guys do. They're all brilliant, excellent researchers. So that's pretty good overview of, I think, what we'll be doing. In terms of where we are heading, I'm just going to close up. And since there's a few of us that are here in the audience, I'm going to turn my sound on. Hopefully, I'm not going to get a lot of feedback here. Nope, I am. I have to keep the sound off. It's crazy to figure that. This is another bug in the system. It'll get working the whole thing out. But what I want to just say is I personally believe that there's a reason that we are subject to such intense visitation by these other beings at this time in our history. And I mean, look, if you go online, you look at the UFO reports that are out there, and you see that they're coming in every single day. And these are reports of like black triangles hovering over your neighborhood at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m, or saucer-shaped objects skulking about at 2 and 3 a.m. A lot of these dead of night sightings that are being seen by people. They're very stealthy. They're almost invisible, but they're not invisible. They are visible. They're just very, very quiet. Who is doing this around the world every day? Well, I think that we are subject to visitation in a very major way. I'm not sure visitation is even the best word for this. Long-term occupation might be the way to put it, but there's a reason it's happening now. And it's not that it didn't happen in ancient times. It's not that there isn't good evidence for the UFO phenomenon existing for thousands of years. But it is my opinion that quantity of interaction is much greater now than it's ever been. And I think the reason is very simple. The reason is that we, humanity, are entering what I keep calling the fourth stage of our existence. From hunting and gathering, stage one, hundreds of thousands of years of that, to agriculture and, settled communities, just 10,000 years of that, to science and industry and transforming our world yet again. That's just a couple of 100 years of that, to this crazy upside down world that we're now in today that no one really understands. And the reason almost none of us really have a grasp on this is because it's moving so fast, because what we're seeing is the coalescing of such an array of advanced technologies that they are working together to transform our entire civilization at such a fundamental level that it's not just changing our economics, Terminator's coming to take your job. No, more than that. It's not just coming to change the way that we live as a society, in which you've got 5G tech with smart devices that will soon be in your home, monitoring every single thing you do and sending it off to the cloud, where some hyper intelligent AI algorithm is going to manage that information. That will transform the way we act as a society. It'll transform human psychology itself. It's fundamentally reorganizing us. And in my view, it's actually making us a lot more like those very aliens that we have been observing. Collective mentality, hive mind, Are we becoming like the Borg on the Star Trek TV show? I mean, hopefully not, but you really have to wonder. There are things in place that are moving us into a very tightly controlled, and I would even say totalitarian, 24/7 digital surveillance society. And I think that's what we're looking at. And that's, it's not a world that I want to live in. I don't think it's a world that you want to live in, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And it's transforming us from the inside out, as it were. And it's going along with many cultural changes as well, which we're seeing as well. So all of this is happening fast, really fast. And I think this is the so-called great change that some abductees say that they've heard about from their hybrid handlers. Talk about the great change. I think this is it. I think they're seeing these beings who are watching us and monitoring us. They know exactly that we're going through this massive transformation right now, and might make us a little bit dangerous. We're developing weapons that are going to be just more increasingly, very formidable. So there's that. And is it possible that we actually might be more of a nuisance than we think we can be? I think it's a real mistake when analysts will say, oh, we're so far behind them. What could we possibly do to, get in their way? They're eons and eons ahead of us. Well, I don't really know necessarily that progress works that way. I don't think that progress works incrementally, like in a straight line. I think it's much more accurate to say that it works by jumps. As we're doing this jump now into stage 4. It's an order of magnitude or orders of magnitude to go from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture. And it's orders of magnitude to go from settled agriculture to industry and science. And I think it's orders of magnitude again to go from where we just have been to this next phase. So no, I don't think it's incremental. And we might actually, as a result of the changes that we're going through, see ourselves in a century from now at a level of orders of magnitude beyond what we currently are at. So I just got a message that I should probably put earbuds or headphones on, and that will probably help. And guess what? Fortunately, I don't have to go across the room to get it. So when I do Q&A, I'm going to put this on, and hopefully that will help. That's my preparation and we will see how this goes. And I think we're going to open this up to folks who are ready to talk. I just need to set up my microphone. Just give me 1 second here, everyone, and do my mic and audio output. I'm just hoping that we get this right. I can't yet hear myself, but there we go. We're all set. I actually hear myself in feedback, so we're just not going to do this. I think for this event for YouTube, I'm going to have to forego the questions because. So let me just thank all of you for being here right now. We're going to have to work this out because when I do the event, I don't want to be hearing myself with a 4-second delay. It's going to make me crazy. But this is our event. This is our virtual environment. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you there. And let me say goodbye to you for now. And if you've signed up for the event, wonderful. If you haven't, you can click the link below and I will see you there in 2 days. So for right now, I just want to thank all of you for being here. So I'll keep fighting the good fight. Catch you all again really soon.